Hi. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Jessica Haller.
And I'm Josh Ratner.
And thanks for joining us for this session on the Global Day of Jewish Learning Under the Same Sky. I'd also like to thank Hazon for putting us here today, and Climate Reality for a lot of the information that I'm going to share. The name of our session is can our Jewish tradition help us understand and care for climate change? So I want to start today by making sure that we're all on the same page regarding climate change, and then Rabbi Josh Ratner is going to walk us through a bunch of sources. And really, we can't, sorry, I'm sharing screens now. We can't care about it and apply Jewish learning to it if we don't really all have the same understanding about what it is. So I'm going to start with our theme of the day, which is under the same sky. And nothing really makes us realize that we're indeed under the same sky than these images: Earthrise from 1968, 1972, Blue Marble. Really the first realizations that all of us are indeed floating through space on the same blue dot, covered by a very thin same sky. In fact, this sky is so thin and fragile, it could be compared to, let's say, the varnish of a schoolroom globe, or the peel of an apple compared to an apple, and that's what's our atmosphere. And we are thickening our atmosphere by the release of carbon dioxide. In fact, we're releasing more carbon dioxide faster than any time in the last 66 million years. So let's just jump into the science for a second. Solar radiation comes from the sun through the atmosphere, hits the planet, it warms us. Some of it bounces back in the form of infrared waves. And some of those infrared waves are bounced back from the atmosphere to warm our Earth. And that's a good thing. It keeps the planet nice and hospitable to us all. But what's happening is, because of use of fossil fuels, industrial processes like industrial agriculture, maybe even thawing permafrost and some natural processes like forest burning, is thickening that atmosphere and trapping more of the infrared waves, making the planet warmer. And that's the basic science behind climate change. And I want to talk now about what's happening and what that means. So what does that second arrow, a little bit more infrared, mean? Well, it means it's the equivalent of 400,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs per day, every single day of the year. Dr. James Hansen from NASA gave us that metric to help us understand that it's that bomb times 400,000 every single day of the year. So just so you get an understanding of how much energy that actually is. So what's happening? Well, every year, there's some cooler days, there's some warmer days, and there's some medium days. Over time, what you're seeing is an absolute shift in the number of extreme temperature days in this graph to the extremely hot to the right. There are still blue days. There are still cold days that are colder than average, but there are much fewer of them, and there are many more extreme days. So what does this heat do to us? In the last 15 years, 14 of them have been the hottest year on record. And so far, 2015 is the hottest ever measured, but I'm guessing that's only because 2016 hasn't concluded yet. What does this heat do to us? Heat index in Iran last year measured 165 degrees. May 19th, 2016, India, 123.8 degrees. Most of that heat is trapped by the oceans. So let's talk about one of the things that that's doing. The warmer oceans is fueling superstorms and hurricanes. This is what you saw outside of the East Coast before Hurricane Sandy. It's what you saw in the Gulf before Hurricane Katrina. And much of that heat means that the atmosphere is capturing more water. Right now, there is 4% more water in the atmosphere than there was 30 years ago. And for each degree that we get warmer, this warm air can hold 7% more water. So what does that mean? It means downfalls and downpours and floods and rates that we haven't ever seen before. If you look closely, the water line is halfway through the window of this pub in England. It also means that the hot air and the heat in the atmosphere is pulling the water out of the dry land, causing drought. Brazil, where the Amazon River is experiencing drought. We all are familiar with what's going on in California. Drought and heat lead to forest fires across the globe. 2010, this one is was pretty poignant to me because the fires in Russia in 2010 caused 55,000 people to die. Also caused a spike in food prices globally. This Syrian farmer talks about what we call desertification. I used to have 400 acres of wheat, he says, and now it's all desert. So what's going on here is that from 2006 to 2010, 60% of Syria's fertile land turned to desert, which meant 1.5 million people came from the Syrian farmland into the cities. And when you talk about unrest in the world, people running out of land to farm, it's a big issue. And right now in the Middle East, in the Mediterranean basin, we're experiencing the worst drought in 900 years. Climate change will likely lead to food and water shortages, pandemic disease, disputes over refugees and resources, and destruction by natural disasters in regions across the globe. This is the US Department of Defense warning us and highlighting us to what's going on. There are other systems that are vulnerable I'll touch on really briefly: food, water, global health, infrastructure. So not only does hotter temperature reduce our yield of staple crops, but it also reduces nutrient levels. When it gets hotter, our use of water increases across industry, people, animals. So we become more vulnerable when there is less water and there's drought. And human health is impacted greatly. Air pollution is affecting us at a very high rate. If you take a look, here's Beijing, China, with and without smog. Here's a clear day, and then a smoggy day, polluted day. We see this in Paris, we see this in LA, we see this in Mexico City, we see this across the world, that there are full cities where people actually can't breathe. And it's affecting children. It affects mental health, cognitive ability in children across the globe today already. Tropical diseases are on the move. As it gets warmer, animals are moving north and south in latitude and longitude, and up in altitude. We're risking 50% of all living species this century. This little frog here, he's famous only because the golden toad, he's actually a toad, was the first frog to actually become, the first amphibian to become extinct because of climate change. Infrastructure is being affected. This bridge is out because of a flood. This was after Hurricane Sandy. Hurricane Irene in Vermont. You have streets melting. This is Reagan National Airport. If you look closely at this picture, you'll see that the airplane has melted into the runway and therefore cannot take off. So you have real impacts on infrastructure. I just want, the costs of carbon, I went through them really quickly, and I apologize that it was fast and a little bit depressing, but hopefully by the end of the session, we'll be able to understand why it's important to, and part of our ancestry and their Jewish wisdom to care about this. I do, though, want to end back to where we begin, and one of the reasons why I care, and I'm going to quote Carl Sagan in this conclusion and say, look again at that dot. That dot that's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines. Every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended on a sunbeam. And I'm not sure if you can see it, but there is a proverbial sunbeam and a little blue dot right here where my cursor is going around, and that's Earth. So one of the reasons that we have to care, and that why our tradition shows us that we have to care, is because we are indeed all in this together and under one sky. If you have any questions on climate science or climate change, happy to answer it in the middle or as we're going through this. And I'm now going to stop screen share so that Rabbi Ratner can get involved in the conversation.
Jessica, for that wonderful introduction to the direness of our circumstances, but also a clear explanation of where science is and what it might call on us to address. And so I want to shift gears a little bit and add a little bit of the Jewish content to this Global Day of Jewish Learning, and go through some texts that I think help explain a little bit of the overall Jewish mindset when it comes to issues of climate and global warming, and just to start to answer the question of what does Judaism have to say about global warming. So I'm going to try doing my little handy dandy screen share here, and I have this source sheet that you're all welcome to follow along. And again, if you have questions as we go through, please let us know, and our folks over at Global Day will let us know what your questions are, and we can respond to them as we go through the presentation. Slowly enough that it's coherent and makes some sense, but also quick enough to get through the material. So the first thing I think that I want to share is an understanding of the overall paradigm in the Jewish imagination when it comes to climate change. And that's a paradigm of stewardship. And that's really the governing principle that animates Jewish responses, Jewish engagement with the environment, with the natural world. So in Genesis 2, verse 15, we get the text, didn't pop up here, I guess, in the PDF. Vaikach Hashem Elohim et ha'adam vayanichehu v'gan Eden le'ovda u'leshomra. The Eternal One placed the human being in the Garden of Eden to till it and to tend it. Those words, le'ovda u'leshomra, are really the key words here. And what does it mean to till and to tend? So I offer a couple interpretations from relatively modern Torah scholars. One from Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. Position is neither as God nor as slave in the midst of the creatures of the earth world, but as brother, as co-working brother. We need to administer the whole divine estate and provide and care for all therein according to the will of God. So to till and to tend the Garden of Eden, and by extension, the Garden of Eden really means all of the natural world in the rabbinic imagination, neither as God nor as slave, but as co-working sibling, as a caretaker in this sense. Another interpretation from Rabbi Norman Lamb: man is not only an oved, a worker and fabricator, he is also a shomer, a trustee, who according to the halacha, according to Jewish law, is obligated to keep the world whole for its true owner, and is responsible to return it in no worse condition than he found it. And I think this notion of trusteeship is something that really animates all the rest of Jewish conversation about the environment. That we are not in an ascetic relationship to the natural world. It's not a completely hands-off approach where we idolize the natural world and don't engage with it. We do engage. In fact, we're encouraged to engage, but we're encouraged to engage and involve ourselves in the natural world as a trustee, as a shomer, as one who will make sure, and as a society and community that will make sure that however we engage with the natural world, we leave it in no worse condition than we found it. And there's a midrash, a rabbinic story that I think helps accentuate this notion of stewardship, of trusteeship. And it comes from Ecclesiastes Rabbah, and it goes as follows. When the Holy One created the human being, God took him and led him all around the trees of the Garden of Eden, and said to him, "Behold my works, how beautiful they are. All that I have created is within your domain. Take care, therefore, that you do not destroy my world. For if you do, there will be no one else to set it right after you." Even though at this time, several hundred years ago, there wasn't really an understanding of extinction in the way that Jessica helped begin to suggest in some of her materials, society couldn't imagine what extinction would mean. There still was this sense of we have to take care of what we have, or else there will be dire circumstances, dire consequences. So I want to shift gears a little bit from this principle of stewardship to another overarching principle that I think is really helpful in trying to understand how how in sort of the rabbinic imagination, we understand our relationship to material items, and that's our relationship to property. And in a couple texts that I picked out that I think help clarify a very different mindset from what we have as Westerners, as Americans. We tend to come from the tradition of the Western liberal rights tradition, thinking of John Locke and others like that, where there's an inalienable right to property, along with other inalienable rights. That's not really the way Jewish tradition looks at property and looks at ownership. In the biblical mindset, so it's from Leviticus chapter 25, verse 23. But the land may not be sold beyond reclaim, for the land is mine. You are but strangers resident with me. In a biblical imagination, all land is God's, and we are given opportunities to partner with God, to share with God, to be stewards of God's property, but it's not ours in any sort of cosmic, long-term, inalienable sense. And similarly, there's a famous passage from Psalms 24, verse 1, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. It's not ours to utilize and exploit and do with as we wish, without any sense of other people having a stake and interest. Instead, we are able to access what in the natural world, property or otherwise, as trustees. I want to now highlight, there's two additional principles. The first here is source 3 or topic 3, waste and destruction, bal tashchit. In Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 19, there's this obscure passage in the midst of a conversation about war and wartime ethics. And it says, when in your war against a city, you have to besiege it a long time in order to capture it. You must not destroy its trees, wielding the axe against them. Kind of an obscure thing. We don't really, not something that one would necessarily think of when talking about siege warfare, not to cut down trees. It turns out that this verse, in the midst of a plethora of other verses about warfare and about ethical conduct, gets picked up by the rabbis, gets elevated by the rabbis as the sort of the seed for a general ethos of avoiding wanton destruction, of being cognizant of waste and conservation. And the rabbis formed this ethic called bal tashchit, which means do not destroy, taken from this verse, and they expand it. And here are two ways in which it's expanded. The first comes from the Babylonian Talmud tractate Kiddushin, page 32a. Whoever breaks vessels or tears garments or destroys a building or clogs a well or does away with food in a destructive manner violates the negative mitzvah of bal tashchit, do not destroy or waste. So you can see here an elevation from warfare activity of chopping down trees to things that are much more domesticated, breaking vessels or tearing a garment or clogging a well. And you can see here the ethic of not wasting or destroying things in sort of a gluttonous or wanton way is something that the rabbis are elevating. Again, far beyond cutting down a tree to things that we might do in our home. Second source, it also comes from the Babylonian Talmud, tractate Shabbat, page 67b. Rav Zutra taught, one who covers an oil lamp or uncovers a naphtha lamp, which thereby burns extra fuel, transgresses the prohibition of wasteful destruction of bal tashchit. So using unnecessary fuel is considered a violation of bal tashchit, at least according to the rabbis going back. The last set of topics I want to look at have to do with conservation and preservation. So it sort of dovetails from the bal tashchit, do not destroy conversation, and gives it sort of what's the affirmative gloss on that. So one comes from a midrashic source, Avot de Rabbi Natan, page 31b. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, if you have a sapling in your hand and someone should say to you that the Messiah has come, go and complete the planting, and then go greet the Messiah. By this, it's suggesting that even though the Messiah coming, clearly something that we should, at least in the rabbinic imagination, relish with absolute joy and zeal, and it's what everyone is hoping will ultimately happen. Even if that transformational moment takes place, you should say, "Hold on, I need to finish planting this sapling in my hand." That's how important it is to plant and to undertake this ethos of being a shomer, of being a protector, a guardian that you're providing for the next generation through your planting. Final source I want to offer, and again, I think this will help us transition into the conversation to follow about steps we can take going forward, comes from the Babylonian Talmud, tractate Ta'anit 23a. Honi, the righteous man, was journeying on the road, and he saw a man planting a carob tree. He asked the man, "How long does it take for this tree to bear fruit?" The man replied, "In 70 years. He then further asked the man, "Are you certain that you will live another 70 years? The man replied, "I found ready-grown carob trees in the world. As my forefathers planted these for me, so I too plant these for my children." And with that, we're going to transition to what steps we can take for our children, as well as for ourselves, translating some of these sources and the scientific consensus that Jessica talked about into where we go from here. Jessica, do you want to take us through some initial ideas?
Sure, that's great. Do you want to yeah, there we go. Hi. I think this part is so important. I was recently got a question about climate change, which basically this Honi story could have answered, which is, well, is it worth doing anything today? Because isn't the stuff that I do today not going to help me? Anything that we do to address carbon dioxide today is going to help us in our children's time. There are a lot of the work that the scientists are doing is about how long will it take for us to slow down essentially what's a locomotive. What's essentially a locomotive that when we put our foot on the brake, the locomotive still goes out for some time. And what we found is that if we maintain business, what we're calling business as usual, and not pay attention to what we're emitting into the atmosphere, we're going to create an inhospitable planet by the end of this century. But that if we shift from business as usual and do things, for example, like the planet has agreed to in the Paris Accord, the UNFCCC Paris Accords, we can greatly reduce the worst impacts of that. And I think that that's important, that everything that we do today is important to look at into the future. So what are the things that let's get concrete, right? What are the things that we can do? And I just want to introduce two frameworks that we can talk about. The first is sort of the individual versus the institutional or the larger scale. And the second is the notion of education leading to action, leading to advocacy. We all need to be, and I'll start with the second framework first. We all need to be educated. So we all need to understand what it is that's going on, what the issues are, and what we can do. We need to all understand, from these source sheets, how our own religions and beliefs lead us to caring about what's going on, how this is indeed a moral issue. We then need to lead ourselves to action. What kind of action? Well, anything that we do that requires, whether it's burning oil lamps, using electricity. So is it simple things like turning out lights or switching your light bulbs to LEDs, which I hope everyone's already done? Paying attention to hot water usage, which is the #1 usage in your home. Can you reduce your usage and then use renewable energy? Could you use solar panels on your roof? Could you pay your energy company to provide you with renewable energy into your home? Could you get a hybrid car? Could you walk? Could you use your bicycle to commute? Can you use public transportation? 80% of our trips in our cars are less than 3 miles, meaning most of the time that we get in our car, we could actually be walking or using a bicycle. How do we, any other ideas, Josh? What comes up in school?
Thermostats is another big one. Just turning your thermostat down by a couple degrees in the wintertime or summertime, depending on what you need, can make huge differences. Unplugging appliances too. If you're going away on a trip, instead of just shutting off the lights, what if you actually turn off your power strips and don't run? So I think there's a lot of things that can be done on the local level. A lot of states now have free energy audits that you can take. That'll show you where you might need some simple things like weather stripping or better insulation. Again, so you're not, it helps your pocketbook in that you're not churning out all sorts of wasted heat or air conditioning, but it also makes a huge difference environmentally.
So I hear through the Wi-Fi, I hear these voices saying, Jessica, Josh, that's ridiculous. I'm a small person. There are 9 billion people on the planet. What difference does it make what I do? So I want to move on from action to advocacy, because I think that that's one of the places that you and I like to function right now. And what do I mean by advocacy, and how do we advocate in today's political environment? And I just want to say, in my mind, advocacy ranges from kids in 4th grade telling the school to make sure that the computers and the lights are turned off at the end of the day. Con Ed in New York has an estimate that each computer that's left on 24 hours costs the owner $100 per year. So if the school has 50 computers and they're all left on all year long, you're right, that's money, but it also impacts the energy that's emitted. So advocacy on the small level, kids talking to parents, kids talking to schools, us talking to our institutions, and then us talking to our political leaders, both at the local and the national level. And I actually have here a document that Josh and I brought forth to Hazon. It's, I think, one of the best ways to implement climate advocacy at a larger level than just ourselves. And it is it's a resolution that was passed by Hazon, basically putting climate change as an issue of importance to the organization. And I'll just read it. It says, whereas Hazon is an organization devoted to creating a healthier, more sustainable Jewish community, both locally and globally. Whereas Jewish tradition compels us to be Shomrei Adama, guardians of the natural world, and that sense of stewardship compels us to actively care for the needs of the environment, which is what we talked about today. And whereas climate change is a huge threat to the health and sustainability of Israel, Jewish communities, and the United States, and vulnerable populations throughout the world, which we also discussed today. Whereas climate change is both a global crisis and an immense opportunity that challenges us to live better and walk more responsibly on the earth, bring Jewish values to life in new ways, and renew and strengthen Jewish life. Therefore, be it resolved that Hazon is committed to using the wisdom of Jewish teaching and collective passion and ingenuity of the Jewish people to inspire a vision for the future in regards to climate change. Hazon is committed to help bring its resources and the resources of Jewish people to bear on this issue and to engage in climate-related education, action, and advocacy when appropriate. Now, what you're also saying to me is right, but Hazon is an environmental organization, so of course they're going to be thinking about this. I think the key takeaway is that it could be any institution. Our Jewish tradition, as we learned today, compels us to do it. We've also started to see these sort of resolutions being passed by camps, by synagogues, and by other institutions that aren't necessarily environmental in nature, and bringing to light that this is part of what we care about. Josh, you have anything else to add to that?
I do, but before I do it, we got a question from the field, from somewhere in cyberspace, so I wanted to just jump in and answer that to whomever sent it in. Thank you, and for others who have questions, please send them in so we can make this as interactive as we can, or at least virtually interactive. So the question we got was, if Gan Eden is a world of harmony between mankind and the rest of creation, is it really linked to the fact that there were only 2 people living in it, Adam and Eve, not 7 billion? Is the mitzvah of having children not contradictory with ecological concern? So I think it's an excellent question. And I think it goes back to what I said a little bit earlier, in that the Jewish tradition is not like, I'm thinking one particular religious tradition, like Jain tradition, where even squashing a bug is considered sinful because everything is so inherently holy, and we shouldn't, or killing a blade of grass is considered sinful. Judaism doesn't necessarily go that far, and we are encouraged in Genesis to engage with the natural world. We're not supposed to be standoffish, and we also are encouraged to have children. But it's what I think is the overarching ethos is, again, this notion of stewardship or trusteeship, that we can utilize but not exploit, utilize but not destroy. So we can have children, but when we're having children, and I say this as someone who has 4 children of my own, so I'm certainly one who is ascribed to having multiple children, thank God I've been able to, but it's doing so in a way that, again, is in harmony with an ethos of trusteeship, of stewardship. So it's not buying new clothes for each child and throwing out the old clothes. It's passing clothes down from one child to another, or toys or things like that. It's a mindfulness of again, not seeing each of us as in it for ourselves individually, but seeing ways in which we can live in harmony with the natural world and live in a way that that promotes long-term sustainability and not individual exploitation. Jessica, do you want to chime in on that one? Or
yeah, I think about that a lot. I think about that. I also have 4 children, and one of the things that I did thinking about this issue of population and the fact that there are so many of us on this planet, so everything we do has such a big impact on the resources on the planet. You're going to say, well, that's not possible, or it's not important. Last year was the Shemitah year, which we might say actually could be another source right on here as being sort of the oldest sustainability law on record, in a sense. And I use the Shemitah year as an opportunity with my 4 kids to not introduce anything new into our house for an entire year. And we actually succeeded. We actually succeeded in not introducing anything new. It meant a few more phone calls to friends for a pair of snow pants to borrow or something like that. But it's completely possible. It's completely possible to live lighter. Another area is how we eat. I did not get into it in the slideshow, but our meat-based diets are a huge driver of climate releasing of methane. When I teach kids, they get a huge kick out of the fact that the cows produce methane, but the burps are not as bad as what comes out of the other end in terms of methane release. It's a little known fact that the kids love doing. I see there's a question about cows participating. Should we eat meat only on Shabbos? How does cows, how does this work? I for one, am a big advocate, and in the Jewish Climate Change Campaign from 2009, we were trying to advocate just shifting ourselves back. If you think about, Josh, our shalosh regalim, right, and eating our meals besimcha, or with joy, and a lot of the rabbis define that as eating meat. Right, that eating meat on the holidays adds joy to the holiday. So on one level, does that mean we kind of really eat meat about 3 times a year, maybe on Shabbos also, right? Meaning that's when we should be eating meat, and not every single night for dinner, 4 different dishes on the Shabbos table. It's important to eat meat and to pay attention to it in the right way. Do that. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think rather than give halachic guidance that we should only eat meat X times. I would suggest that we should try to reduce the amount of meat and animal products we have in our diet. And if you're eating meat like some Americans 7 days a week, maybe that means cutting it down to 5. If you're eating meat 3 days a week, maybe that means cutting it down to once. And if having meat on Shabbat happens to be something that really resonates for you, then great. But see if there's other ways to cut it down because the impacts are so dramatic. Rav Kook, early 20th century, huge rabbinic presence in Israel, himself believed in vegetarianism, but wasn't yet ready to give it up wholesale, and so he went with the eating meat only on Shabbat approach, at least until the Messiah came. So that's one approach, but I do think it gets to the bigger question of a mindfulness of how what we do locally really has global and even beyond global atmospheric repercussions. And so doing ways and also teaching your kids about this. If there's a reason why, if you decide to be intentional and reduce your meat, explain why you're having a vegetarian dish today when the kids are asking, why can't we have hamburgers? And get them involved, because I find that they can get pretty excited even at early ages to feel like they're participating in something that helps keep their planet safer and healthier.
Yeah, so actually I want to segue to that for this. A lot of what we do in Judaism is about teaching our children. So I think we could talk for a couple minutes about what it is that you and I, who are very immersed in this, tell our children, and because that is a question I get a lot as well. So what do you tell your children? Do you have those conversations with them?
I do. It's usually in specific moments, like if I catch them accidentally throwing a milk carton into the trash instead of into the recycling bin. Try to explain to them why it's not just a 1 second decision and it's all going out of the house anyway, so who cares? Trying to explain to them what keeping green means and why it's something that we should celebrate. There's cute songs that we have recorded that we listen to about what it means to keep green from a Jewish perspective. And I've taken them to the Isabel Friedman Retreat Center, which is part of Hazon. It's a gorgeous place if anyone happens to be in or around Northwest Connecticut. It's a fabulous place to be. And just to walk around and explore. One other favorite thing I do with my younger kids, I have a 6-year-old daughter, is we belong to a CSA, a community supported agriculture, where you get sort of a share of whatever's grown that week at the farm. And they have an option to do from time to time when conditions permit, to do some picking out in the fields. And so I'll take her out with me and we'll pick cherry tomatoes off of the tree or pick peas, and to actually
tomatoes grow on plants, not trees.
Pardon me?
Tomatoes
Yes.
grow on plants, not trees.
Yes, that is true. But to actually have that visceral connection of seeing where produce actually comes from, and then actually popping in your mouth and having that connection is so different from the kind of atomized way in which we go to the grocery store and you get your prepackaged chicken breasts where you don't even know it comes from a chicken. It just looks like it came from the cellophane tree. And I think it's a real way to build connections to the natural world by actually seeing how things work.
Yeah, it's so important. My kids say, wait, is it chicken like real chicken? There's a connection. In terms of climate change, my kids are very much aware of the things that I work on and aware of what I'm nervous about for the future. I tell them like it is. I bring them, we all went to the People's Climate March a year and a half ago, or was it 2 years ago already? I involve them in the local and the national political movements. And I am not afraid of telling them what's happening and what's going on. And one of the things that I've learned is that the best way to make them care about it is to have them watch that you care and I care, and have them see that, so that when they are adults, and maybe they're trying to figure out if there'll ever be snow in New York and New Jersey again. They won't turn around and say, what were my parents thinking? What were they doing? Because they'll know that this was something that we worked on. I'll be part of it.
We got one more question going back to the food. People are very, very interested in food conversations, which is great. This is a Jewish context, so we would expect no less. The question is, will we still eat meat when the Messiah comes? As someone who is a vegetarian, I feel ill-equipped to answer this because I've already gone off that wagon. Hopefully conditions when the Messiah comes will be such that it won't even be an issue for those who really want it, be able to, and those who don't want it won't feel climactic implications from doing so. Do we want to spend a couple minutes talking a little bit more on the policy side in terms of action and advocacy? Because I know that for some who care about climate change, there's a lot of trepidation about what that means under a Trump administration. And with the Paris Treaty, will it be undone? Will all the EPA regulations that have been enacted under President Obama be undone? And if so, what can we do about it? So just do you want to start in that direction? I can add a few things too.
Sure. Clearly a major concern. Clearly something I've been thinking about for, I think it's been 11 days. A couple of facts I want to point out. The Kyoto Protocol, sort of the first international treaty, was actually signed by the United States. And everyone knows that the United States was not party to the Kyoto Protocol, but we actually, under Clinton administration, we signed it. And it never went to Congress, and we never ratified the treaty, which is why we weren't a party to it. But yet, over the last almost 20 years, the United States, actually the states and the cities, have done a tremendous amount to work on their carbon emissions, whether it's RGGI, so the regional greenhouse gas carbon trading system up in the Northeast, or different requirements on the state level for energy plants. There's a lot going on at the state level. I think it will be. I think that we're going to have to do a lot of work on the international scene, but I don't think that all hope is lost, because I think that we've been in similar situations before, and I think what it means is that we all have to work really hard. We all have to educate all of our senators and congressmen and local officials. I mean, I don't know, I can't imagine which. There are 196 countries party to the Paris Accords. I'm assuming that New York State is larger than, by itself, is larger than a large number of those countries. I'm assuming the state of California is larger than many of those countries. There will be a lot that we can do, but I think what happened is we're rolling down the hill a little bit back. We thought we were just in advocacy. We thought we were almost there. We're going to have to now go back and do a lot more education and a lot more individual action. But I don't think it's all lost.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think along the lines of education and action, I'm part of a local coalition here between unions and faith leaders and environmentalists to try to talk about how being pro-environmental regulation and pro and anti-climate change can actually work from an economic standpoint as well. You don't have to choose between jobs or the environment. That you can actually have both by focusing on green jobs and focusing on ways to transform industries like coal into more clean energy solutions. So it doesn't have to be an either or, which tends to be the narrative that we hear a lot. The other thing, just to amplify what you said, when I was growing up, there was the big slogan of think globally, act locally. And I think that was mainly about recycling. I don't even remember what it was about. But I think today we have so many options of what acting locally can actually mean beyond or in addition to what we talked about earlier, what you can do in your home or in your institution. At the state level, just to amplify what you said about Reggie. Reggie is a consortium of New England states that have come up with their own cap and trade program because the federal government wasn't able to implement one. But we have multiple states actually participating in a cap and trade program. I didn't even know that it existed until recently. So certainly there's more education that needs to happen on that level. California also has a cap and trade program going on. So even if we can't get action done at the federal level, and we should, of course, still try to do so. But even if we can't get that done, there are significant steps that can be taken locally and at the state level. Asking your city council or mayor to adopt a climate change plan for the municipality. Yep. And looking at how resources are being used locally, trying to put more applications out for electric buses as opposed to gas churning buses the next time those are up for consideration. Lots of things like that can happen locally that really have significant implications.
And for our synagogues and our Jewish institutions and our Jewish schools, if we need education, climate reality is a good place to start to get people to come in to educate. Hazon is another good place to start. There's a Hazon seal of sustainability that's on the Hazon website, which is just a institution's process of education, action, and advocacy with all sorts of ideas in a Jewish context. And we can move ourselves and our communities forward, because anything that I look at here makes me realize how connected this is to the Jewish world. And I just also want to say, in 2009, I was at Windsor Castle as a delegate for the Jewish Climate Change Campaign with representatives of essentially all the religions of the world. And one thing that was clear was that if you want to reach 80% of the global population, who own 7% of the land mass on the planet, and who are the third largest financial transactor on the planet, you go through faith. And the clear message across all people of faith was that, similar to our theme today, under one sky, it was many heavens, one earth. Many heavens, one earth, but under the same sky. That we're all under the same sky, and we're all dealing now and going to have to deal with these realities. And it is part of what we believe in.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that while I come to this work, this advocacy from a Jewish perspective, because that's what animates me, we know how the percentage of Jews in America, despite what we might think of ourselves, is infinitesimally small compared to the rest of the country, and all the more so globally. Ways to address issues like climate change from an interfaith capacity is going to become more and more important in the days and weeks and months to come. And if we want to be a voice for change, the more people we can channel into that conversation, the healthier, more robust, and more impactful it'll be.
Right. You're at that conference. The representatives of the evangelical Christian representatives said to me, Jessica, whatever the Orthodox Jews are doing, I will tell our evangelical Christian churches, and they'll jump on board also. The other story is the Sikh community, and there are about twice as many Sikhs in the world as there are Jews. The Sikh community adopted the Jewish Climate Change Campaign, changed the words from synagogue to gurdwara and from Devar Torah to something else, and applied it exactly to their to their religion. And I think that's exactly right. We're a small group, but what we do is important, and what we do matters, and we affect everyone around us.
And just one more example of that, I was last year I spoke at an interfaith response to the Pope's encyclical on climate change, which is another huge step, and I have to believe was at least somewhat influenced by Jewish and other faith-based advocacy on this issue. and I had some prepared remarks that I was going to give, and a Muslim chaplain was speaking before me, and he actually used a source that he knew of from the Muslim tradition that was the exact same thing as a midrash or rabbinic tale that I was going to be using in mine about the environment. So just another way to reinforce how much we are all under the same sky here, and the more we can do collectively, the more impact we're going to have.
Awesome. So I think with that, we answered the question, does caring for creation mean caring about climate change? And I think that the answer is yes.
So we hope you'll continue to hope you're engaged and a little bit inspired from this this conversation, that you'll join us in being allies and advocates from a Jewish perspective to address global warming and climate change, and help the world we aspire to have. And with that, we thank you for taking the time to be with us this afternoon.
Bye. Thank you.